Today on Stronger Than Reason, I talk about seeing the Magnetic Fields perform their album 69 Love Songs live for its 25th anniversary. Welcome to Stronger Than Reason. Okay, so let's talk about once-in-a-lifetime opportunities. Some of you may be aware that we recently had a total solar eclipse pass over North America, and that the next one isn't going to happen for another 20 years or so. Now, this may not have come across in the show yet, but I am something of a space buff. Most little kids go through a dinosaur phase and an astronomy phase. Well, I never left my astronomy phase. I'm still in it. I'm also up on the history of U.S. space exploration, and I can tell you who flew in all the early missions from Mercury through Apollo. Not that anyone gives a crap, but you might think that I was psyched to jump on this opportunity to catch a total eclipse. And I was last year, but I guess I wasn't very serious about it, because if I had, I would have made hotel reservations and such. But it was in the back of my mind. Now, as you may know, I am a fan of the band The Magnetic Fields, and last summer I did a whole episode on their magnum opus triple album, 69 Love Songs. That was episode 26, for those who might want to go back and revisit it and hear why I hold that album in such high regard. But at the end of the episode, I pointed out that I had never seen them play live, but they were planning some dates on the East Coast in 2023, pretty far from me, though. So it turns out I did investigate catching those shows, but it didn't work out. The logistics were just too crazy. So I reluctantly bailed in hopes that I would have a chance to see them sometime later. And in the meantime, I did join their mailing list. So imagine my surprise when they pinged to say that they were going to celebrate the 25th anniversary of 69 Love Songs by touring that album in 2024. And this was it in my mind. This was the show I had to see. This is my favorite album of theirs, and to see them play all 69 songs in order with as many of the original players as possible, it would just be a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity. So after hemming and hawing, which is my MO, I snapped up the tickets at the last possible moment, completely forgetting that there was a major astronomical event happening 6 days prior. Well, with one thing and another, I couldn't drive to both the eclipse and the show, so I would have to make a choice. And you know what? I think I chose wisely, because that feeling that you all got from seeing the total solar eclipse, I had that in spades seeing the Magnetic Fields play this album. And my show lasted a total of 3 hours over 2 nights, not just 2 minutes, just saying. But I thought it was a pretty good deal. So yeah, it was a crazy trip to New York City, but it was totally worth it. Mrs. Stronger Than Reason and I had about the worst seats possible in that theater, which really weren't bad at all, by the way. So if any of you were at the show and happened to look up all the way in the back corner of the balcony to feel bad for the people sitting up there, you were looking right at us. So yeah, there's that. But let's talk about the show. So the idea was that they would play the entire album, all 69 songs in order, which would be crazy to do in one go. So they broke it up across 2 nights. So the first night, last Friday, they played the first 35 songs, starting with the Disc 1 opener, Absolutely Cuckoo, and ending just after Promises of Eternity from Disc 2. The second night started right up with the next song, World Love, and ended with the last song on Disc 3, Zebra. I have to say that it was the most enjoyable show I've seen in recent memory, maybe because, like a total solar eclipse, it was just such a rare thing, requiring one to be in just the right place at the right time. It's something I never thought I'd have the chance to see. This is one of my favorite albums, obviously, but the TLDR is that I think it's just a unique work of art. Its sheer scope and breadth are very impressive. So to continue with the New York theme, most musical artists are building the kind of beautiful bridges that you see in Central Park. The ones that were given such imaginative and evocative names like Bridge 34. And there's nothing wrong with that. But in 69 Love Songs, the Magnetic Fields have built the Brooklyn Bridge. It's just a whole other level entirely. And to see it performed live with the original musicians in all its glory, that's just a bucket list item right there. And it was also interesting to sit and listen to the entire work in one go in order, albeit split across 2 nights. If I'm being honest, I have to say that I do have my favorites on this record, and some songs I like more and some songs I like less. And when given a choice, as many of us do in this day and age, in this era of convenience over art, I do tend to skip around. But to sit in a theater and hear the entire thing from front to back with no skipping elevated the whole experience. In fact, I found myself really getting into some of the songs I previously dismissed because they were just good. You know, they were as good, if not better than some of my so-called favorites. And they're the songs that are still rattling around in my head now, days later. So maybe it took having to sit in that seat and give it all a really deep listen to appreciate them all again. But I want to point out that this was not a rock concert in the traditional sense. The setting was the Town Hall Theater on West 43rd, the site of many amazing performances and recordings over the past 100 years. So this was very much a theater concert. In other words, comfy seating and an ornate, tasteful environment. There was no opening band. There was no fake ending. There was no encore. They didn't play any songs that weren't from this album. They simply came out, the house lights went down, and they played the songs one after another. And they did sell out 4 nights at this venue the previous week, but I'd say these shows that I went to were about, maybe like 90% sold out. The place looked full to me from way up there in the peanut gallery, but there were a few empty seats here and there. The crowd was great. They listened to each song attentively and applauded with enthusiasm, and every now and then something cool would happen and there'd be applause in the middle of a song. And maybe once or twice I was conscious of the crowd actually singing along. But you know, there were a lot of quiet parts in this show, real moments of gravity, if you will, and during them you could really hear a pin drop. The whole place was just holding its collective breath. So the audience was really into it, which was awesome. Always love to see that at a show. But we hit the merch booth right away. In fact, we got to the venue silly early, before the doors opened even, due to my bad planning. So we ended up peeking through the doors at the merch table and picking out what we wanted. And I got this cool shirt. Then we walked around the block to kill some time, and it turns out, believe it or not, one end of the block was Times Square. So, you know, that was interesting. Not that I love teeming crowds of people crammed together, but we came back around to the theater, and I noticed around the corner, Christopher Ewan was there enjoying a cigarette. And I was too wimpy to go over and say hello, but it was cool to see him just chilling out there. I'm a big fan of his through his work with the Future Bible Heroes. And of course, he has credits on 69 Love Songs too, as one of the original musicians. So yeah, we left him alone. You're welcome, Christopher. And speaking of, let's talk about the lineup here. The announcements on the band's webpage only showed a few people in the band. Stephen Merritt, of course, John Woo on guitar, Sam Duvall on cello, Shirley Sims on vocals and ukulele, Chris Ewan on keyboards, and Tony Kaczynski on vocals and guitar. And at first, I was pretty bummed at not seeing Claudia Gonson on the promo material, because with Stephen, John, and Sam, she's the 4th core member of the band and features prominently in these songs, singing and playing keys and lots of odds and ends. Fortunately, she was at these shows, which was awesome. I suspected as much when I sat down and noticed a second keyboard station on stage right. I got the impression she wasn't going to be at all of their shows in this tour. Maybe she was only there because she lives around New York. So seeing her there made me feel really lucky. But there was one other original musician present, and that was Dudley Clute, who sings some of my favorite songs like A Long Forgotten Fairy Tale and It's a Crime. And he was a real trip. He spent about 90% of the show in an armchair on one side, just politely sitting there with his head down, tapping his shoe. And every now and then he'd get up and slide over to his mic to drop a killer vocal. And it was hilarious and great. And it just flew in the face of almost everything I know about pop music, concert traditions, and expectations. You know, the whole idea that performers have to get up there and perform, not just play the music. Well, at this show, they just played the music, and it was fantastic. At full strength, they had 8 folks up there recreating these songs, 5 of whom were singing. And it's not the case that everyone sang and played on every song. A lot of times it would be just 3 or 4 or 5 people active at once, which isn't really unlike Pigface, now that I think about it. Maybe a strange comparison. But still, they had a lot of musical firepower. But really, this show was not about technical prowess or stage presence or performance per se. It was a showcase for Steven's songwriting, particularly his lyrics and the vocals that brought the lyrics alive. And that gave the show more than enough power to hold our attention for nearly 3 hours. Actually, there was one song that wasn't technically performed at all. You fans out there might know which one I mean. It was the only one that featured no one on stage playing or singing anything. And that's right, it was Experimental Music Love, which, true to its name, is just a sample of Steven saying the title and then looping bits of it over and over with a granular synth. So for that one song, they simply brought down all the lights and played the studio recording. And it was just pretty short. And afterward, the crowd gave a bit of an applause and the band just launched into the next tune. So one person was notably absent, the vocalist and merit documentarian L.D. Batol, who unfortunately passed away in 2020 at the age of 56. And Steven did point this out in one of his very few bits of inter-song banter, saying that the band split up LD's vocal parts randomly. But yeah, I mean, he was missed. Someone actually yelled out, "We love you, LD," in a rare break from theater decorum. Steven actually didn't talk much throughout the shows, but when he did, it was usually pretty funny. So in an understated, very dry kind of way. So on the first night, just after the third song, he announced, "This is our last song." And later in the set, he reached for the mic and started to say, "I wrote this next song." And we were left thinking we'd get a story about its inspiration, but then he just said, "Obviously," and then counted it in. And the only other member who spoke between tunes was Claudia, which is great because she and Steven go way back and have a good back and forth. But yeah, this show did not have the long Cardinal Copia-esque digressions or amusing stories about local traffic conditions. It was really just focused on the music. But it was great to see this lineup on stage, I gotta say, and see them bring these songs to life. So Steven walked out with an old-timey metal lunchbox, which he later opened to reveal a lot of percussion toys, and that's all he played. Shirley Sims played the ukulele and just killed it. Normally Steven, of course, plays the uke. But at this show, he sang, he played occasional triangle and whatnot. In fact, he dropped the triangle between songs and then remarked, "This is a lot harder than it looks." But the thing that got me were his vocals, though. I used to think, listening to the record, this guy's voice can't be this low for real. It just can't. I mean, it's comically low. Like, think of Mr. Bean or maybe James Earl Jones with a serious head cold. So when he sang the song Xylophone Track on the second night, which was really the only honest-to-God blues song in this whole album, I just thought the speakers were going to blow out because the notes he was hitting were so low, I could hear the individual waves beating against my eardrum. It was super, super low. But when he sang, he emoted a lot for a guy who's so famously reticent. He changed up his delivery. He'd get loud and quiet, very good dynamics, and he'd stretch his arms out to hang onto a mic stand, or he'd put his hands on the top of his head. And now and then he would mime actions like swaddling a baby when he sang The Night You Can't Remember, or in that same song, kicking his legs out when singing about being a rockette. In fact, he actually started that song by saying, "Here's a true story from when I was a rockette." And once he even wrapped his arms around himself and started rocking back and forth, which just perfectly channeled Robert Smith. I mean, I just saw Robert Smith do exactly the same thing from about 20 feet away when I saw The Cure last year. So you Cure fans out there, give The Magnetic Fields a spin. I think you might find something to love. But really, though, what Steven was offering up here were his words. These songs are just a feast of his words. There's joy, hatred, hope, loneliness, anger, sarcasm, regret, heartbreak, and pure love. It's all there, folks. Very concisely and perfectly stated. And this is the guy who somehow made that all happen. And, genius is not a word that I throw around a lot. A quick search here in my notes shows that I only use the word in 7 of these episodes. And this is what? This is the 60th episode. And one of those 7 episodes was about the magnetic field. So yeah, I don't use it lightly, but Stephen Merritt is a genius to be able to write such amazing lyrics, first off, but then to compose such amazing music to perfectly showcase them. Folks, here's the greatest praise I can give. Mrs. Stronger Than Reason was not a Magnetic Fields fan going into this, but she is now. And by the end of the show, she was laughing at all the good bits and really into it. And there were a lot of good bits. We laughed a lot. So that's saying something that he won her over, because she's mostly a casual music fan, unlike yours truly. But it was awesome to see the rest of the band do their thing as well. I was really happy. I'm always happy to see a live band play. I'm really happy to see people play instruments and perform music live so that I could watch what they're doing. I can hear them doing it, see them doing it, put that together. I think that's so entertaining to me. I just appreciate it so much. So I was really happy to watch John Woo switch up between his acoustic guitar and a telly and a banjo. And I gradually realized that the sound that I was hearing on a lot of these tunes that I thought was a ukulele was in fact John on the banjo. And it's funny because he never played it in a traditional, finger picking bluegrass kind of way. He played it like I would probably play it, just like a guitar, just picking out melodies. And it was really cool because it just gave such a unique sound. Sam Duvall pretty much blew me away. He was rocking a bodiless electric cello. He was essentially filling the role of a bassist. In fact, on a lot of these songs, he'd put the bow down and just play finger style, like it was a string bass, like he was Sam Jones, who played on that very stage with Thelonious Monk in 1959. So other times, like my wife pointed out, he'd play his cello like it was another voice singing. So there would be like a lead vocalist and backup singers, and then you'd have Sam's cello filling a similar role, providing reinforcement or harmony. And he even took a few of the leads that were played by other instruments on the album, like the guitar lead at the end of Epitaph for My Heart. And just both he and John are such great understated players. They added so much to every song. They're just real pros and were a joy to watch. And personally, I was keeping an eye on Chris Ewan just because, as you know, I'm an electronic music nerd, and he was back there with his keyboard and synth setup. And I did not see a laptop anywhere in his station, which isn't to say that one wasn't there somewhere, but it did seem like he was the guy who was wrangling the drum machine on the songs that had a drum machine. And just to be clear, there was no acoustic drum set on the stage. The Magnetic Fields never play with acoustic drum anymore because Steven has some ear damage and it's just way too loud on stage to have acoustic drums anymore. But so Chris was dealing with the drum machine. He also played a ton of keyboard, usually like the synth hooks that are in all these songs all over this album. And I was really happy to watch him play A Long Forgotten Fairy Tale, which is maybe the song that caught my ear the most when I first bought this album way back when. It's definitely the most synth poppy song on here. And he did more playing on that song than I thought he would, which was really interesting to see. In fact, I wish I had this show on video so I could go back and just enjoy it all over again, kind of like I did with my first Ghost show, which is still up on YouTube. But alas, this was not the kind of crowd to record the whole thing and just put it out there on YouTube. In fact, I saw very, very few phones at all, which was kind of a surprise. And when I did see them, it was usually because people were using their flashlights to kind of to light their way to and from their seats. So there are individual songs from this tour up on YouTube that you can check out if you're interested, but it seems that I'll only be able to relive the entire show in my memory. Also, it was fun to watch Claudia, who played some really awesome piano and sang a bunch of leads. Again, I was really happy to see that she and Dudley made it to this show. It made it that much more authentic to me. It's more similar to the original recordings because these two folks play such a big part in the album. And Claudia played some flute too. And at one point, she encouraged Dudley to get out of his armchair and help add the claps to the death of Ferdinand de Saussure, which was fun. He just grudgingly got up, went to the mic, clapped, and then went back to his chair. And I especially like Claudia's piano on My Only Friend. I'm pretty sure that on the album, Steven doubled it by playing it through a delay unit, so it just sounds like huge and flowing. And they didn't do that live, but she just played it like a champ, this like very complicated piece, and I was really impressed. And I also have to call out her duet with Steven on Yeah, Oh Yeah. So we were confused the second night because we came in and sat down and saw that they had added a couple step ladders to the stage. Kind of like the stage crew forgot them or something, and no one remarked on them at all. Now, for those who aren't familiar, Yeah, Oh Yeah is a song where the husband and wife are arguing through these call and response vocals. So when they started this song, Claudia climbed one ladder and Steven climbed the other, and they were singing back and forth to each other up there. It was a kind of a tiny nod to actual performance in the traditional rock show sense. But it was enough. You know, the audience loved it, and the song was darkly hilarious. And it's just brilliant, I think, how the title seems so positive, but when it's repeated by Steven in response to whatever Claudia is saying, it just becomes incredibly negative. It's just great stuff, and it was a fan favorite for sure. And, you know, and then Dudley, of course, once the audience got the gist that he was just there to lay down killer vocals every dozen songs or so, they really got into him coming up to the mic and egged him on and encouraged him. And I got to say, it was a thrill to hear him belt out some of my favorite tunes. And last but not least, Tony Kaczynski, who provided a lot of rhythm guitar and backup and lead vocals, filling in on some of LD's songs. And he's the only one on stage here who wasn't on the original album, but I know he's played with the Future Bible Heroes in the past. That's how I'm familiar with him, and you may also know him from his other band, Figures on a Beach. But here, his crowning moment of awesome was at the end of the first night when he literally got a spotlight lead vocal on the final song, Promises of Eternity. Now, Steven sang on the original, but for whatever reason, he gave it to Tony here, and he really nailed it. The song is just so over the top. It demands an over the top vocal, and that's what he gave. And he really wowed the crowd. And throughout the nights, I think he just delivered some great guitar and vocals. And I also have to hand it to him because he spent more time than anyone else before each set out on stage, making sure his guitar and gear were set up just so, you know, kind of like being his own roadie. And I could relate because I would do the same thing in that situation. I would want to double and triple check everything personally. I don't have OCD, but I am very detail oriented. So yeah, I was pretty much blown away by these shows, if you can't tell. The missus and I enjoyed them very much. We were really happy to go back the second night to see more. The crowd was great. The theater staff were great. The sound was amazing. I mean, what more can you ask from a live show? And I was especially happy that I saw 3 hours of music from the comfort of a cushioned seat. And I'm not sure, folks, but my days of standing for hours on end in some club might be over. In fact, that's exactly why I passed on seeing TKK and KMFDM a few months ago. I heard from a friend that the KMFDM show was great, but it was just packed elbow to elbow. And I'm just not down for that anymore. It's not a COVID thing. It's more of a general, I don't want to be uncomfortable thing. Plus, you know, these shows that have 9 o'clock doors and 2 opening bands, you know, by the time the headliner comes on, it's 11 p.m. And man, yeah, I'm just ready for bed. I'm not 25 anymore, and staying up late, standing in a packed crowd, it just isn't something I really want to do unless the band is 100% worth it, as it was last year for Skinny Puppy, Love and Rockets, and The Cure. Like, I would do those again, but I somehow couldn't be bothered for TKK or KMFDM. I'm sorry, Groovy and Sasha. I don't know why, but there it is. But as for the Magnetic Fields, I have some catching up to do. They released, 4 or 5 albums since I've really listened to them. And I know Steven has a solo album as well. So I have some listening to do. And I'm especially interested to hear their album Distortion, since I think it'll appeal to me in a way that their folkier stuff just doesn't. But we'll see. And if you haven't seen it, I encourage you to check out Steven's appearance on NPR's Project Song. It's a show where they get a songwriter in the studio and make them write a song from scratch in 48 hours. And it's just a pretty fascinating window into how Steven works. And it made me realize that this guy can play piano, drums, and guitar as well as or better than I can. He just usually chooses not to, but he's able to put all these things together and arrange and mix and get do harmonies, vocal harmonies, and the end result is really cool. You have to check it out. It's a neat tune that he comes up with. I'm not sure that it ever made its way to a commercial release, but you can listen to and watch the whole thing right there on YouTube. So yeah, all in all, it was a fun weekend in the city. Good company, good food, and good music. Only had one bad bagel experience, but you can't win them all. New York normally isn't my bag, but I gotta say we found a way to do it that was pretty stress-free. So maybe there will be future musical excursions there. And if so, you know that I will report back. And there you have it, folks. The Magnetic Fields 1999 magnum opus, 69 love songs performed live in its entirety by the original musicians for the 25th anniversary shows. I understand they'll be playing some West Coast shows in coming weeks, so catch them if you can, and let's hope that maybe Steven considers releasing a film of these shows. That would be a real treat for the fans. You're listening to Stronger Than Reason either on YouTube or as an Apple or Spotify podcast, the show that grimaces every time one of those bike carriages goes by blasting loud hip-hop. I mean, seriously, where did these guys come from? Who had that idea first, and why did it catch on? And why do we never once see anyone riding in those things? I mean, I suspect it's just another money laundering scheme, somehow, some way. As always, I thank you for listening, and until next time, stay strong.